Welcome to Progressive Short Takes. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and this short take asks the question, who will be Joe Biden's Treasury Secretary? Yeah, maybe I'm being premature. Maybe Joe Biden is not going to win. But you have to admit that right now it's looking like he is widening his lead, and it does look good. So let's start considering who might be selection. Well, there are a number of names being thrown around who are right-wing and reactionary, including Jamie Dimon or people of that stripe. But there's a strong movement inside of the Biden ranks, but to appoint someone who will at least not be hostile to the people, not be entirely for the corporates. And so there are some people whose names are being bandied about, who are being considered. One of them is Louise Brainard. She is not entirely well known, but according to according to Bob Kuttner, who had an article in the American Prospect on September 23rd, she is the odds-on favorite to be Joe Biden's Treasury Secretary. And he says that she's a Federal Reserve governor right now, who held several senior posts in the centrist Biden milieu, but moved moderately to the left with the needs of the times, could be the symbol and substance of Biden himself. I'm not going to go through her whole background here, but she did work for McKinsey. She had a teaching stint at MIT, and still in her 30s, in 1997, she landed as deputy director of the National Economic Council under Clinton, with a focus on international economics. She spent the Bush 2 years mostly at Brookings Institution, where she directed the Global Economy Program from 2006-2009. Then she was named by Obama to be Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Affairs. When Geithner left the Treasury Secretary job in 2013, she made a run at the Deputy Secretary position but was passed over. But Obama named her as a governor of the Federal Reserve in January 2014. So she has all kinds of experience within the financial sector and the government part of the financial sector. When she was outside of the government part, she was at the Brookings Institution. She didn't go to Wall Street to make a bunch of money, at Wall Street. She's been a career scholar and a public official. She would presumably be less of a lightning rod for progressive critics than a Wall Street figure. Now, her policies are likely to be activist around the edges, but on the other hand, they'd be no threat to Wall Street's core business model, according to Kuttner, which might make her acceptable to both some progressives and to Biden and to Wall Street in general. She is smart, personable, a good listener, a shrewd technician, and very ambitious. Says a senior figure who has sometimes worked with her and sometimes against her. It's fair to say she has politically distanced herself from the Rubin, Summers, Geithner wing of the party, but the same person says, I won't call her progressive. But for the past several years, she has gone out of her way to be accessible to groups, to her left, like Fed Up, the grassroots protest group of critics, sponsored by the Center for Popular Democracy, the successor organization to ACORN, views her as a sometime ally. In August 2015, at the Jackson Hole meetings of the Fed, where everybody meets, it's like the Davos of the Fed, but Brainard, then a fairly new Fed governor, sat down with Fed Up activists who were in Jackson Hole protesting the impact of Fed policies on workers and families. Brainard, who was hoping to be Hillary Clinton's Treasury Secretary, began meeting regularly with progressive groups, took on the franchise as the Fed's own leading advocate of monetary policies friendly to full employment. Then she had a big argument, which was covered well with Janet Yellen on monetary policy. She pushed to the left of Yellen in the 2014 to 2018 period. She opposed the raising of Fed rates all through this period, but as late as 2018, the Fed was still nudging the rates upward. On August 27th, the Fed unveiled a long-awaited new monetary framework that will allow higher inflation than its average 2% target for some periods and permit the Fed to tolerate lower unemployment without triggering preemptive hikes in interest rates. This is the policy shift. In other words, this policy was put into effect by Fed Chair Jay Powell, called a flexible form of inflation targeting, quote unquote. This is the policy shift that Brainard was urging for years in public speeches and in private conversations at the Fed. This stance put her actually slightly to the left, of Yellen, who herself was the only liberal Fed chair since Mariner Eccles, FDR's chairman of the Fed. I think that's right. She has been the only liberal Fed chair since Eccles, and Brainard is to her left. She gave a speech in May 2019 entitled, quote, "The Disconnect Between Inflation and Unemployment and the New Normal," in which basically she denied the validity of the Phillips curve. At a Brookings panel September 1st assessing the significance of the new framework, she and Yellen politely clashed over whether the economy would have done better had the new framework been in place in 2015. By 2020, Brainard was pushing on an open door in terms of loosening money, but it was a door she helped to open. Her dovishness on monetary policy was also in evidence when she was the top international official at Treasury, when she pressed the AU and the European Central Bank to lighten up on their perverse austerity politics. So she looks better than many other possible appointees. Kuttner calls her the odds-on favorite. He also says it's also important to place her actions in the context of Fed norms. For the most part, the Fed is a very clubby institution. It operates by consensus. If your goal is to have a real influence, you're not able to dissent too much, or you are just dismissed as a gadfly. When she cast the lone vote in April 2018 against a rule change, it was her first dissent in 6 years. That was a rule change. That was a rule change against the idea of weakening bank capital requirements. But by the way, it's an MMT position that the capital requirements should be strengthened. So in that context, she's in line with what MMT wants to do, or at least more in line than other people at the Fed who voted for weakening the capital requirements. She was not dissenting just to make a point. She's an inside player. She likes to have an impact. She's had a recent success in keeping the Fed from joining the control of the currency in watering down the Community Reinvestment Act. I won't talk much about the Community Reinvestment Act, but what I want to do here is to move away from Brainard and to point out that There is another candidate who is more populist, than Brainard is. Her name is Sarah Bloom by Raskin. And she's another possible candidate. I do want to mention here before I get to the other possible candidate. In the CARES Act, the major economic program that was enacted in May, Congress gave the Fed almost $500 billion, which in turn was intended to leverage about $5 trillion in lending. Two of the credit facilities are almost unused. There's $75 billion targeted at the municipal by lending, and another $75 billion for medium-sized businesses that in turn employ some 48 million people. But the terms have been so draconian that hardly anyone has applied. According to FedUp, some 97% of state and local governments which nominally qualify for credit under the program are excluded by the terms. When it comes to the Main Street lending program, a great many businesses don't want or need loans. What they need, is equity. The tougher terms are mainly the work of Secretary Mnuchin. Both the Fed and the Treasury are quick to blame the Congress, but of course we know the fault is really the Fed. And the Treasury's here. They don't want to interfere with the profits of the muni bond markets and with the banks. So they're trying to keep the interest rates higher because they prefer to advantage big banks and large corporations against the small businesses. But Brainard has advocated for liberalization here, and she might well do it. Going away from her, though, three potential alternatives who might edge her out. One is Elizabeth Warren. She would be a game changer as Treasury Secretary, according to Kuttner, but she's in a category of one. There is simply nobody else as savvy about how financial markets work, as deeply committed to drastic reform, and as politically shrewd. I think I would argue with those characterizations of Warren. She certainly hasn't been very shrewd in relation to who she supported in 2016 and who she blocked, basically, from the nomination in 2020. Not very shrewd, at all. Not very savvy at all, in my view. Also, Wall Street would be very opposed to Warren as an alternative. But there is another second possibility. Her name is Sarah Bloom by Raskin. And like Warren, she's a progressive on financial regulation and reform. Similar to Brainard, she's been both the governor of the Federal Reserve from 2010 to 2014 and held a senior post as Treasury, where she served as Deputy Secretary from March 2014 through the end of the Obama administration. She's also served at the state level as Maryland's banking commissioner. At the Fed, she was a major force for unconventionally progressive thinking on regulatory and monetary issues. At Treasury, serving as the number two under Jack Lew, who, by the way, was Clinton's austerity maven, he was the main figure responsible for the surpluses in the Clinton administration because of the way he managed things. And he served as a role trying like hell to reduce the deficit for Obama, too. He served in both of these administrations as an austerity monger. But Raskin was the inside player in charge of what she calls the plumbing, all the mechanical parts of what Treasury does. This background gives her extensive knowledge of how the system actually operates. She's also a friend of Jamie Galbraith's. I think she's a former student of Jamie Galbraith's, and perhaps even a former protege of his. But he knows her very well. He knows her very well. And she's also made a speech at the Economists for Peace and Security conferences. I believe in the first year that Stephanie Kelton was running that organization. But anyway, since leaving government, Raskin has been an astute critic of the Fed's favoritism for propping up Wall Street at the expense of the real economy. She's come up with ingenious proposals for reversing these priorities, and there's a link to a conversation with the Prospect, about that. And she's had other writings and speeches, about that. She is also half of a Washington power couple, as Brainard is, but a very different one ideologically. Her husband is Representative Jamie Raskin, a leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and one of the most progressive congresspeople in Congress. He really is a progressive fighter. Maybe he doesn't get the press that AOC and Omar and Presley, and Rashida Tlaib get, but he is very, very much on the left and a fighter on the left and for the left. I would rate him as progressive as Ro Khanna and as progressive as Jayapal as well. And he's in there fighting. So, who Sarah Bloom Raskin is married to is relevant. That's who she's married to. And according to Kuttner, the difference between Louise Brainard and Raskin is a difference between center-left and progressive. Should Warren not make a run for the job, then progressive groups have made clear to the Biden people that their choice would be Raskin. And in my mind, I think Raskin is a better choice than Warren. We don't need to have Warren vacate a Senate seat at this point, and I think she's less trustworthy than Raskin is anyway. As a radical reformer, Raskin would likely be just as much of a target as Warren for Wall Street opposition, but she might not inherit the grassroots support of Warren unless Warren made clear that Raskin was a choice for the job and spent real capital on it. Warren might well do that. Okay, so those are some possibilities. One other long shot possibility as Treasury Secretary is Stephanie Kelton, but I don't really think that's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is she's much more likely to be on the National Economics Council. So I wanted to talk about Treasury Secretary possibilities to give you some idea about that. I've now done it, so I will say goodbye for this progressive short take, and I'll be back with another short take soon. Thank you very much.